Hey everyone, so I wanted to get on because it's come to my attention, and I've actually thought about this at some point in the past, but it's come to my attention very recently that most people don't really even know what post-traumatic growth is, and that's important, right? There's actually something to be said that is useful to know, even in the explanation of why people don't know what post-traumatic growth is. When in the context, almost everyone has heard of PTSD, right? PTSD is, that's now a common turn of phrase, even for people that actually don't really have a clinical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So post-traumatic stress, PTS or PTSD, is very, very common, very well known, something that, people will talk about on the, in the barbershop and also in the doctor's office. But post-traumatic growth is very, very, it's not completely unknown. Of course, in certain circles, it's common knowledge, but it's not nearly as widespread. And there's actually, because the society at large is in a state of what I would call survival mode, which is related to PTSD, which is related to your nervous system being in a state of alarm. So most people, including the very structure of our system, are in survival mode most of the time. And survival mode is what we would commonly know as what is responsible for having us be in fight, flight, or freeze. But most people are approaching life this way. Most people, and this is not, by the way, you do not have to have experienced specific or particular trauma for your nervous system to be stuck most of the time in survival mode. And so survival mode, it's like, when you're giving someone the finger in traffic, that's survival mode. When you're yelling at your kids to get out of the door, that's survival mode. When you're feeling overwhelmed about doing the dishes, that's survival mode. When you're getting in fights with your spouse, that's survival mode. When you are feeling overwhelmed or feeling anxious or having a panic attack, that's survival mode. When you are, when you are just generally feeling like flat or there's no sense of purpose or meaning in life, that's survival mode. So really, survival mode is far more ubiquitous and the norm than most people think. And so you can pretty much rest assured that if you aren't doing something particular to have upgraded your nervous system from the default survival mode to thriving mode, that you're probably operating in survival mode much or most of the time. So, including the very researchers and doctors and people that write the books and put out the things and talk about PTSD and write the diagnostic manuals and things like that, their emphasis, one of the things that the survival mode does is it forces us to narrow our focus. And I'm doing narrow our focus. We narrow our focus on what feels like the perceived threat. And that's a really important distinction. It is a perceived threat that can get our attention. It doesn't have to be a real threat. It can be a real threat. What's up, Greg? Nice to see you. It can be a real threat, but it doesn't have to be a real threat. It can be a perceived threat that really narrows our attention and our focus. And the example of this is you're walking through the woods and you go and you see what appears to be a snake out of the corner of your eye, and you narrow your focus. You lock in on it until you can observe it well enough to, it's just a stick. Okay, but our brain is designed to assume that the stick is a snake, and then to narrow our focus on it, step back, and then, okay, it's just a stick. But that is what that mechanism is at play day to day in our lives, and our alarm system is being triggered by traffic, by overwhelm, by social media stuff, by the news we hear, etc. And we are going into survival mode almost all the time in the way that most people are living these days, okay? So most people, including the systems of medicine, of psychology, of therapy, of self-help, etc., are narrowed. Their focus is narrowed on the problem. It's narrowed on the threat. So we've heard a lot about PTSD. We've heard a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder. We hear a lot about the problems. But here's the problem with that. Because when something is focused on the problem, there's a principle in neuroscience called sprouting and pruning. And that means that whatever you focus on grows, basically. It's like whatever you're paying attention to is going to start to grow. So if you're paying attention to, oh my gosh, there's a snake, oh my gosh, there's a snake, your heart rate is going to go up. You're going to start to feel the sensations of fear stronger and stronger. And then the more you feel that, the more you think, oh, it must be a snake. It must really be a snake because I feel it. And we get stuck in what is called the thinking, feeling loop. And so when our focus is narrowed on the problem, on the threat, we actually strengthen that problem. We strengthen that problem even under the guise of wanting to get rid of it. So if I'm narrowed anxiety is my problem. PTSD, I have PTSD, and I'm always anxious, and I'm always hypervigilant, and I'm always worried, and then now I'm exacerbating that. Okay, so we have a medical system, we have a psychology system, we have a therapy system, we have a self-help system that is focused on the problem. And why is that? Well, sickness and disempowerment is profitable, first of all. And oftentimes that's not from bad actors. That's oftentimes mostly well-intentioned people that don't know better, that are maybe stuck in the situation themselves, that think that that their focus is narrowed on the problem. And so they are not able to open up and expand their attention to consider other possibilities or other solutions, okay? And so one, it's profitable, and keeping people disempowered and sick is, a multi-zillion-dollar business. And sometimes that's through bad actors, and most of the time it's through ignorance, okay? And then the next one is that they just genuinely don't know better, okay? And so, but I want to talk to people about post-traumatic growth, because this is one of the things that really struck me when I used to work with combat veterans and I used to work at the VA, is like these people are told, like, and I don't know if this has changed now, but the running line at the VA when I was working with veterans more consistently is that PTSD is permanent and there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to learn how to cope with it. And I'm like, that's such bullshit, And so, that's a system that is focused on the problem. And of course, if you keep focusing on the problem, it is going to be permanent, because it's going to keep growing and it's going to get out of control, and you're only going to be able to manage it at best. But post-traumatic growth is actually very natural and very inevitable if you know what to do and if you know how to do it. And post-traumatic growth is one of the main characteristics of post-traumatic growth is, I would never want to go through that again. I didn't ask for it. I didn't like it. I don't prefer it. But somehow I'm actually grateful that it happened, because I have a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. I'm in love with my life, and I've opened my heart in certain ways that I never would have if I hadn't gone through that. And it's not about permitting something bad or gaslighting ourselves or denial or avoidance of trauma of blame or wrongdoing or anything like that. But it is about saying, like, you know what? I've gone through it to such a degree that I'm actually somehow grateful. That doesn't mean I would want it to happen again. It doesn't mean I wouldn't avoid the very same circumstances if they arose again. But actually, I'm somehow grateful, and I'm in love with my life, and it is more deep and rich and meaningful and purposeful, and I have energy and aliveness, and I have passion again, and I have excitement, and I'm sleeping well, and I have joy, and that's post-traumatic growth, and that is an option. That is an inevitability if you activate certain elements of your nervous system. And so I just want to share that with people, and just to share, like, the very fact that we don't know about this is because we're operating in a system and in a matrix, so to speak, in a governmental system, in an educational system, in a medicinal system that is coming from a problem saturated narrative. And it is not aware of the possibilities, but the possibilities are actually very natural. Post-traumatic growth are very optimal, are very achievable, that there is a path, there are maps, there are tools, there are instructions to follow to lead us along that path to get those types of results. I'm not saying that it's necessarily easy, but it's also definitely not as hard as people would make it out to be. And it certainly is a tender process at certain moments. And I'm not saying that there aren't some, bumps and bruises and some real, challenges along the way, but it is a very navigatable I don't know if I say that right. It is a very accessible and authentic path, okay? And that's what I want to really just communicate with you all today, to really share that with you all today, that if you're struggling, and also the ubiquity of people's nervous system being stuck in survival mode, you do not have to have had a very specific trauma. You do not have to have identified as being traumatized. The fact of the matter is that most people, most of the time are coming at life through survival mode. And that's why we feel so exhausted. That's why we feel overwhelmed. That's why we don't feel, bursting with joy and gratitude, even if we have success. That's why we are kind of know that we're loved but don't really feel it. That's why we are, overwhelmed, tired, frustrated, yelling and cutting, yelling at traffic, and it is basically because of our nervous system is stuck in survival mode, and that is basically because of trauma. And it does not mean that you are repressing some memory that you don't remember about. Like, this can happen just kind of through the normal wear and tear in life, or it could be that very obvious or acute things have happened. But either way, it's common, it's ubiquitous, but it's also very, very, very workable. And so that's it. If you have any questions, if you are watching this live, or if you're watching this as a replay, just let me know. Reach out anytime. All right. Love to all. Ciao.